Vice President Kamala Harris has faced a slew of critics since she was put on the ticket. A lot of folks, since she's been in the White House, have been saying she is a drag on President Joe Biden. Look at polling numbers say that as well. Others say she is being completely judged incorrectly. Well, Jennifer Rubin, a columnist with the Washington Post, published this article a couple of days ago that says that Vice President Kamala Harris is indeed an asset, that she is an underrated asset to this administration and to Democrats. I caught up with her earlier today. Here's our conversation. Jennifer, glad to have you on the show. I saw your piece, Kamala Harris is an underrated asset. And here's what's interesting. We have seen 3 years of a steady stream of stories. Oh, my God, she's horrible. She has no idea what she's doing. And when the narrative is framed that way, it has an impact then on polling numbers. And I think this is a perfect example of a lot of people who have no clue really what the hell the vice president does.
That's absolutely right. You know, first of all, vice presidents generally are not that well regarded, and most of them are frankly atrocious. Do we remember Dan Quayle spell potato with an E? Do we remember Dan Quayle and his other fellow Republican vice presidents like Mike Pence, who used to stare adoringly up at his boss and come up with one ridiculous compliment after another? Do we remember wooden Al Gore? You know, most vice presidents don't have a great reputation, and in part because it's kind of a made-up job. They don't have a constitutional role other than presiding over the Senate, which Kamala Harris has done many times because it's so divided. But basically, they're there as an insurance policy. Now, unlike some presidents, President Biden has given her substantive things to do, and she's done them. She's traveled all over the world. Most people are not familiar with the fact that she has conducted international diplomacy on behalf of the administration. And moreover, on issues that really hit home for many, many Americans, and I think are going to determine the outcome of the election, like voting rights, like abortion, like now IVF, like climate change, guns. She has been out there doing battle, and she's doing college campuses. Many of them are HBCUs, so she is reaching communities of color. She's really carrying her own weight and more. So this notion that she's somehow a drag on the ticket or she's not ready for prime time, I don't know where it comes from. And, you know, when people write these columns or they make these little spiels on cable TV, they rarely talk specifics. And that's because they're not going to find anything specifically that she's done wrong. And in fact, she's done a lot right.
Well, I think part of this is also, again, when you go back to framing. So I've seen journalists, folks, white mainstream journalists. I've seen folks in black media go, "Oh, where's she been?" And I'm going, do you not know how to use Google? If you look at her Instagram feed, her Twitter feed, you will see the speeches given. You will see the travel. You will see what she's involved in. But one of the things that she's even talked about that people just somehow act like it didn't exist, really for the first year to a year and a half of the Biden presidency, we were still in COVID. And so there were limitations in terms of moving her and the president around. So to act like that didn't exist is nonsensical, where she was sort of locked in. And to your point, because Democrats were locked in a tie, she needed to stay close to D.C. where they needed her to vote. And she's now has broken the record of the most tie-breaking votes. And so this notion that, oh, we were going to see her all around the country was always crazy.
You know, it's a really, really good point. And you're right. Why do they make that complaint about her and not about the president or other people? You know, we haven't talked about it directly, but obviously some of this is because she is a trailblazer. She's the first woman of color. She's the first woman to be in that role. And I think there is almost a sense of entitlement among a lot of people in the mainstream media that therefore they can, you know, judge her harshly. They can apply a different standard to her than they would to anyone else. I didn't hear all of these people complaining when Mike Pence was vice president. I didn't hear these people complaining when Joe Biden was vice president. And she's been as integral a part of this administration as those people were in their own administrations. So you're right. It's this double and triple standard. And this notion, by the way, that the president could simply dump her from the ticket and everything would be okay is mind-bogglingly stupid. Can you imagine the uproar? Rightly so. If he dumped the first woman of color as vice president off his ticket, and for what? To get what? We already know people essentially don't really vote for the vice president. So he's going to piss off millions of people, including women and people of color whose votes he desperately needs. For what? To get some milk toasty person who then they're going to shred for being, I don't know, too quiet or too loud, too deferential, not deferential enough. The entire conversation strikes me as a bunch of bored people who are too lazy to get out and listen to her. And one of the things I did in the piece that you were so generous to recognize is actually look at what she's been saying. She's incredibly effective, incredibly articulate in ways no one else in this administration has been. When the special counsel's report came out that was essentially a political smear on the president, she gave the single most effective rebuttal, talking about what Biden does on a daily basis. She says, I've been with him. He's asking questions. He's directing our national security apparatus. He was involved in the days directly after October 7th, the war in Gaza. She gave a very vivid picture. And why was she able to do that? Because she's there. She's in the room. She is part of the team. So I think people, have this mindset, this framing, as you put it, and don't bother me with the facts. They're going to stick to it come hell or high water.
Also, I think it's important for us to also look back when she ran for president. There was no other candidate who was attacked as vehemently by Russian bots. When you look at the data is there. She far and away. Now, when I see that, the first thing that jumps out at me is, oh, she's an absolute threat. You got that going on. Second of all, you've got people who are in this administration who want to run for president. So she is a threat to them. People need to understand, and people not just look at 2024. They're looking at if Biden-Harris gets reelected in 2024, then she's the front runner in 2028. There are 8 to 10 to 12 to 15 people who really want to be president. And so they don't want to see her in that critical position. And so I think it's nonsensical to not recognize there are multiple factors at play in this whole game of how do we take Vice President Kamala Harris out?
Wow, that is such a good point. And, when you think about it, the critics, the Whisper campaign is doing exactly what Russian bots were doing. They're hand in hand because, of course, the Russians, first of all, want to foment racial unrest, racial conflict in the United States. Secondly, they don't want President Biden to win. They want the patsy who has invited Putin to attack Europe in power. So what are people doing who are engaged in this sniping and whispering campaign? They're doing the Kremlin's work for them. That's all this is. And it's mind-bogglingly counterproductive, coming especially from people who say they want the president to win. Well, this is not the way to get the president elected, dumping on his judgment and dumping on his vice president.
And you alluded to this earlier. And again, for those of us who actually pay attention to these things, if you look at how President Biden has positioned Vice President Kamala Harris, there is no vice president in my lifetime. And then if I even go before, I was born November 14, 1968, you go before that, there has been no vice president that the president has positioned in a forward place. What I mean by that is you look at many of the major speeches, the major events that have happened. Typically, President Biden will have her speak first, then he speaks. I don't recall President Obama doing that for Biden. I don't recall Bush doing it for Cheney. I don't recall Clinton doing it for Gore. We could go on and on and on. And so this idea that, oh, she's been a part of a disappearing act, it's like what the hell are y'all talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's she who is going out on the college tour. It's she who is packing auditoriums and getting incredibly enthusiastic crowds. So the notion that the president thinks she's some kind of deficit or is hurting the ticket, no, he has figured out she is one of the critical parts of getting elected. She has got to get young people, she's got to get women, got to get people of color, got to get people who care about the same issues that she articulates so well. There is no one in the administration who's stronger on abortion and on women's rights than she. The president, frankly, doesn't like to talk about abortion all that much. He's a good Catholic, and it makes him, I think, a little nervous, quite frankly. She has no qualms, and she talks about it in exactly the right way. She says, this is about freedom. And boy, is she right. And as we learned this week with the IVF decision in Alabama, it's about the freedom to decide when you're going to have kids, if you're going to have kids, how you're going to have kids. And she, like a righteous prosecutor, is making that case more effectively than anybody else in the administration.
A couple of more questions. Let's go back a bit, and you might remember this very well. Again, a lot of people, this notion, even dealing with Israel and Hamas in Gaza, wanting Vice President Harris to come out forcefully. And I kept saying, folks, she serves at the pleasure of the president. She cannot do that. I participated in conversations with Sunday morning hosts with Vice President Biden, and there were things that he was pushing President Obama on that Obama wasn't there yet. The role of a vice president is to provide private counsel to represent the interests of the president. Now, we know when Vice President Biden, when he went on Meet the Press and staked out his position on gay marriage, we know Obama was not happy that he got pushed on that, but Biden made a calculated risk. And so I think people need to understand a vice president, they're not looked upon well if they are out here freelancing and doing whatever they want to, and they're frankly are opposed to the position of the president.
Exactly. I mean, this is crazy stuff. Did people expect that Dick Cheney was going to come out and criticize President Bush on gay marriage, for example, when he was supportive of it because of one of his daughters and President Bush was catering to the right wing? No, he just shut up about it. So that is the job of the vice president. You don't go around bad-mouthing your boss or creating conflict. And by the way, that doesn't even achieve the aims, because then our allies don't know which one to believe, which one to listen to. She is effective because she carries his message and articulates it in a way that is extremely effective. That's what she was doing, for example, in Munich, when she delivered a very strong speech, really laying into Trump and Putin for seeking to disrupt NATO. That's what she does, is take the president's message, formulate in a way that she's comfortable with and that reaches audiences he cannot. That is her highest use, and that's what she's doing right now.
Last question here, and I think this is really important, and we also had to factor some things in. There were some missteps. There were some mistakes. It is different when you go from being district attorney to Attorney General of California to United States Senator to being vice president. You're in a bubble that is unlike any other. And they're learning, there's a learning curve there. But I think what we were seeing in your article, your piece really lays it out. We're seeing her, frankly, move into, in music, there's a phrase called stay in the pocket. And so she's sort of in that space right now. You can tell, and we live stream all of her stuff on the Black Star Network. You can tell when she's now speaking, she is far more confident. Yeah. She is far more aggressive. And I think, to use a phrase earlier, I think we're absolutely going to see her take on that prosecutorial role over the next 7 to 8 months. And that is going to be the Vice President Kamala Harris that we see. And it's going to remind people when she was grilling Republican nominees when she was in the United States Senate.
Absolutely. And the phrase that I use is that she has sharpened the message. She's not saying anything differently than she did before. She is just razor sharp, and she delivers it with power, without any hesitation now. And it is a matter of coming into her own. She wasn't in the U.S. Senate for that long, frankly, before she was chosen for vice president. And there, her best moments, again, were prosecuting the case, usually grilling the Supreme Court nominees, who she was exactly right about and what their ultimate goal was once they got on the court. So I think she has grown into the role, and I think we're seeing more of who she is. And I think we're seeing exactly why the president chose her as vice president. She has skills, ability, and identity that he doesn't, and he needs.
Folks, check out the piece, Kamala Harris is an underrated asset, by Jennifer Rubin in the Washington Post. Jennifer, we appreciate you joining us on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.